Ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
I'm Kevin Chilton, the Explorer Chair for the Mitchell Institute's Spacepower Advantage Center of Excellence. Today, the National Reconnaissance Office is leading one of the most ambitious architectural transformations in intelligence history. In just 2 years, the NRO has deployed more than 200 satellites. This marks a fundamental change from a model of a few highly capable systems to one of proliferated, resilient constellations. This isn't just about more satellites. It's about reimagining how we collect, process, and deliver intelligence from space to our terrestrial warfighters. Improving this intelligence collection has never been more critical. Since 2015, China has increased their on-orbit assets by more than 500% and regularly exercises their growing capabilities and space-enabled kill webs to support their terrestrial forces. To help us understand this transformation, we're joined today by Major General Christopher Povak, the Deputy Director of the National Reconnaissance Office and Commander of the Space Force element to the NRO. General Povak, thanks for coming back to the Mitchell Institute, joining us again. I think it's been over a year since you were here.
2 years.
2 years, and a lot has changed. So
yes,
I'm excited to have you back here. Welcome back, and to hear what has changed and help our audience understand the direction the NRO is going in today, which, as we just mentioned, or I just mentioned, is quite a bit different than it was even 5 years ago.
Yes, sir.
So, Chris, I would like to give you the opportunity to say a few words at the start, and then we'll get into Q&A.
Yes, sir.
Great.
Well, sir, first, thanks so much for the invitation to come back. We're huge fans of what the Mitchell Institute is doing to advocate and to educate on the importance of air and space capabilities for the nation.
Thank you.
And sir, it's always great to talk to you, so thanks so much for this opportunity. It's an honor to be here today to talk about the people and the vital mission of the National Reconnaissance Office. As many of you out there know, the National Reconnaissance Office leads the nation in the R&D, that's research and development, the acquisition, the launch, the deployment, and the operations of our nation's array of space-based intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance systems, both those sensors in space and the supporting ground infrastructure. Literally today, our team represents the world experts in building, operating, and integrating these capabilities to promote America's national security initiatives. Over the last 64 years, the National Reconnaissance Office has provided the United States and our allies with an information advantage against competitors and potential adversaries around the world. From space, we can see, hear, and sense anywhere in the world, providing our warfighting customers, our analysts, policymakers, and our allies and first responders the information they need to do their mission at a timing and tempo often of their choosing. We've had a busy couple of years of the last 2 years, and I can tell you that is absolutely true. For one thing, that you mentioned that we've launched over 200 satellites into orbit. We've also done quite a bit on assuring our critical infrastructure at our ground stations around the world. We've invested significantly in our cybersecurity activities, both the systems, the tools, and the expertise needed to defend our cyber terrain. We've deployed and now continue to operationalize our proliferated architecture, which is going to provide orders of magnitude more data to our users around the world. We're also have successfully outlined and deployed our first ever artificial intelligence strategy for the National Reconnaissance Office. And what that is really the roadmap of how we're going to integrate AI, machine learning, and other data science procedures throughout our organization. We also had our first ever unclassified tech forum where we brought new technologies from new entrants to include startups and small businesses, really to see where these new technologies can be integrated into the NRO's mission and really kind of further our mission. We also are working with industry, speaking of industry, with the world's and the nation's leading providers in AI capabilities on creating what we call an ultra-dense environment, which is a one-of-a-kind, high-side compute capability which allows us to test, to train, to work through and to implement AI capabilities that are supporting workflow improvements and actually delivering more mission outcomes. Just last year, we celebrated the 10th anniversary of our own civilian workforce, which we call the NRO cadre, that brings specific technical expertise into organization and persistence of our staffing stability with these great technical experts in our organization. And then lastly, since we last met, our organization has earned its 16th and now, just last month, our 17th consecutive clean financial audit, which just represents how the NRO is doing great stewardship of public funds and also adhering to really strict financial management practices. And we're really, really proud of that. Sir, lastly, I'll just say that you mentioned that we're at a precipice of a major transformation for our organization, and we're modernizing our entire space and ground infrastructure now and over the next 10 years. So what is that going to do for us? Well, it's going to do a couple things. First, it's going to increase both the persistent and the precision of our ability to collect information from space. And with that collection, we're producing more and more data. So that's really driving the imperative for us to drive automation throughout our entire operational processes. Next, we understand that the military community and the intelligence community are relying more and more on the processes, the procedures, and the data provided by the National Reconnaissance Office. So we need to ensure that we're not only available during times of competition like now, but also into crisis and conflict. So we're investing significantly, I mean billions of dollars, into the resilience of our systems and our architectures around the world. And then lastly, we just can't do this mission on our own. Partnerships are critical to our success, and we're really promoting partnerships with industry, with academia, with our other government agency partners, and with our allies. So that's what we're up to these days, sir. It's one or two things that are on our playbook right now. But sir, it's an honor to be here to talk about the people and the mission of the NRO, and I look forward to the conversation,
You
sir.
bet. So what are you doing with your spare time? It sounds, I mean, there's so much work going on there. This is pretty incredible. And it truly is a sea state change. And if I could reflect back on the NRO of the past, if you will, and it's not the NRO, it's the architecture that we had in the past. We just had a few really excellent, outstanding reconnaissance satellites in space. And so there was never enough to take all the pictures of everything you wanted to see, this presence bit that you talked about. And so the military would make requests, the intelligence community would make requests, the policymakers would make requests for imagery of a particular area or collection, and that would go to, for imagery, the NGA, and they'd prioritize it, and they had rules for how they prioritized. And as a result, oftentimes, certainly in conflict, the delivery of that intelligence to the military, who's trying to plan for the Air Force, for example, tomorrow's strike in a conflict, or understand were their strikes successful, they never got the image in a timely enough fashion to affect their battle rhythm at the operational level of war. So we dropped a bomb from an airplane. Okay, we need a picture to see if it hit the target. It comes in 3 days later, but I've got to know before that airplane lands so I know if I need to retarget. So that was always a constraint. Part of it was being out prioritized, and certainly understand that there's priorities have to be established. Part of it was, and that led to tasking, so where was it going to look and when? And then part of it was just the information flow seemed to be serial from your systems as you collected them would go to, say, the NGA, they to analyze them and then deliver them to the department, as opposed to just, the Department of Defense maybe didn't need to have high precision photographs, high resolution. They just needed to know whether the bomb hit the target or not. So how is proliferation and the 200 satellite architecture, is it in place partly to address that, as well as the survivability aspect of reducing the big, fat, juicy targets?
All right, well, let me start off by saying that we're in the midst of developing and deploying and operating literally the nation's, the the nation's largest and most complex government satellite constellation right now. We have more satellites on orbit from a government standpoint than we've ever had, and we're continuing to grow that. One of the drivers for that is exactly what you're talking about, is that need for not only exquisite collection, what I call precision, but also the persistence of coverage. And that was really the design driver that drove us to this idea of proliferation that we're on the path towards achieving right now. So I'd say there's really 4 benefits that I'll just share with you. One is that, like I said, persistence of coverage. With more satellites on orbit, you have more opportunities to revisit every single spot on the Earth more times a day. I think the second thing, though, is what you talk about is the timeliness of delivery. So reducing the time from collection to delivery of a product. And we're doing that because this proliferated architecture is a mix of sensors and communications satellites. And that, combined with now a global architecture of gateway sites on the ground, really reduces that time from when you collect something, process it, and distribute it down from hours now to single-digit minutes, and in the future we're talking seconds.
Okay.
So we're talking about persistence and timeliness. The other thing is that the nature of our ability to go from a few number of really capable, highly expensive and capable systems now to a proliferated architecture of hundreds of satellites is that for every single satellite, the individual capability of that is a little less than we've had in the past. But as a whole, the constellation is providing much, much more capability than we have.
Right.
So that each of those individual satellites, even though they're not as exquisite, the data that comes out of those, because it's not as detailed or exquisite as the systems that we've traditionally operated, allows for more opportunities for shareability with allies and partners, obviously through the right authority approval processes. And I think the last thing is control of the sensor. And you mentioned the word tasking. My boss doesn't like to use the word tasking, but how do you create the demand signal for that system? And this proliferated architecture is allowing now more opportunities for the military customers to, in many cases, to control the timing and tempo of where that collection is doing to meet their mission requirements. So I'll just say that this proliferated constellation, we're continuing to field these. We'll have several more launches next year, but we're already seeing great output from these systems. And just a couple of examples of that. Since we launched our first sensors back in October of 2024, we've had the opportunity to do 81 of what we call activation opportunities with the military services in the combatant commands. And what these are deliberate collection windows where we are working with our customers for pre-planned objectives. And often these are tied to military exercises or command exercise, where you have the right people in place, you have the right tools in place, and then you have people from the NRO, NGA, and the US Space Force there to help work through training. So basically we're getting reps and sets of these systems before they even get into their operational state. And we've got great feedback from our customers on these activations, and we're making changes and edits based on the feedback we're getting. And we're also seeing that for each of these individual systems, we're getting more collection out of them than we originally designed. And so far, we've collected over 160,000 collections and had really amazing results from these systems. Just the last point, if I could, is that as we look now to the future, it's not all about proliferation. The NRO is not turning our back on the exquisite capabilities that have been the hallmark of our organization for the last 6 decades. We owe it to the nation, and the nation expects of us to build the best space-based capabilities that the world has ever seen, to continue to interject groundbreaking technologies to make sure that we can see and hear things that no one else can from the ultimate high ground of space. And we're absolutely committed to doing that. And just one last example is that next week I'll be down at Cape Canaveral and seeing the launch of NRO L77, which is just another example of one of those systems.
That's great. That was going to be my next question. Are we backing away from the exquisite collections? But we're not.
No.
Because they're certainly important. And it was never, the conversation of the past architecture was never to diminish that capability or the need for it. It was just we didn't have enough of them, and then you had to prioritize as a result. So with regard to data coming down, oftentimes the data from those satellites had to be processed and then analyzed and then produce the product. It sounds like some of these newer satellites will have easier data, as you mentioned, to come down. So rather than having to go through a pipe that includes another agency looking at it, interpreting it, and then providing it to the combatant commander, will there be parallel paths so that they're seeing everything, everybody's seeing everything at the same time, and you can pull what you need from that image for your particular mission, whether it's indications and warnings perhaps for the intelligence community, or actually operational level of war, command and control for the combatant commander.
I'd say the way I'd answer that is that you're not looking at serial paths for
Parallel,
any.
good.
Right. So you have now ability to have multiple different ways of getting data to your customer.
Great.
And let's not diminish the importance of having the right experts analyzing and exploiting the data.
Absolutely.
And whether that is done at a intelligence agency or out in the combatant commands, there is going to be a close partnership between experts from the combatant commands, intelligence and operations teams, from the NSA and NGA personnel that are deployed forward into the combatant commands, and our Space Force guardians that are going to be out in working the experts on space capabilities. That team of people working together. Oh, and by the way, we have NRO personnel that are deployed to every single combatant command. That is going to continue to be a very powerful team to exploit these systems.
There's going to be some education required there as well, how to use the data that's coming down
right.
most efficiently for their needs.
Yes, sir.
That's great. Well, that truly is a sea state change for the NRO and for warfighters of the future, the terrestrial warfighters. So it sounds like they'll be getting the information they've demanded in the past and just haven't been able to get in a timely enough fashion. Speak a little bit more about numbers and resilience and survivability. How does I mean, if you only have 2 satellites up there, imagining you only have to have 2 systems to shoot them down. Now with 200 and perhaps more, is this also part of the calculus?
Well, if you're talking about the threat landscape.
Yeah, particularly, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, as Sarah, as you know, and as many in the audience know, is that we are operating in space, which is now a contested and a congested environment. The NRO is literally in the fight today. And why is that? Because I think that we in this nation understand the importance of the information advantage that NRO capabilities provides, and our competitors know that as well. And as China, Russia, and other nations are deploying more and more space capabilities, you mentioned the 500% increase since 2015 from China alone. They're also deploying capabilities that are designed and intended to deny us access and the ability to freely operate in space, counter space systems. And we in the NRO need to ensure that our systems are, as I mentioned before, available not just in times of competition here, but even as we get into conflict scenarios. We are laser focused on how we build resilience and how we defend our assets on the ground and in space. We can talk about how we're doing that in a second, but just to re-emphasize the threat landscape that we see. Yeah. Our partners in the United States Space Force just do a magnificent job of monitoring how all these threats are evolving, both things that are in operations today and how our competitors are really posturing themselves for the future. And they're making sure that not only the intelligence community and the Department of War understands this, but also the public understands this. And as you know, and many of your teammates here at Mitchell understand, that the Space Force has just recently put out an unclassified space threat fact sheet. And it's a really great document. And I just encourage everyone who's listening out there, if you haven't read it yet, I think you should, because as the nation continues to rely more and more on space to drive our economy, our communications, our national security, we should all understand the nature of the threat that's out there.
Yeah, it answers the why question for the American public and
Absolutely.
Congress and everyone else, is why are we doing this? And
That's right,
it's so
sir.
important to get
Right. And just, if I could, just a couple of examples. I mean, so China right now, as you know, as of 2015, they literally reorganized their military apparatus with a command focusing on their space operations. You mentioned the growth of their systems. A lot of those systems are key enablers to their military lethality. How you can have more integrated ISR systems, communication systems to their warfighting capabilities. They're also deploying, and back in 2007, China did the first on-orbit demonstration of a direct ascent ASAT, causing significant debris. Some of that is still on orbit today.
Will be for 100 years.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And that's not the only
Yeah.
test that they've done. It's the only destructive test they've done.
Yeah.
It's not the only test they've done. They're continuing to test directed energy weapons, both lasers and high-power microwaves. And then as they improve their large-scale exercises, they're actively including jamming capability in their strategy that they're testing in these exercises. Russia, on the other hand, they believe that space is a legitimate warfighting domain. They too have tested direct descent ASATs. They call it the Noodle in a kinetic fashion, generating over 1,500 pieces of debris, jeopardizing the health and safety of Americans and Russians on the International Space Station and Chinese taikonauts on their space station. Russia too is deploying high energy weapons, or at least testing them out, I would say. Since 2017, they've launched now 5 low Earth orbiting systems that the intelligence community assesses to be R&D co-orbital ASAT systems, and 4 of those are in the same orbital plane as national security space systems. And then lastly, as we've seen in Ukraine, the Russians are freely using jamming techniques, making that one of the most hostile and harsh electronic magnetic environments in the world. So this is not just some future threat that's out there in the distance. This is something that we as a space community are dealing with today. So just the last part of that is that what's the NRO doing about that? One is that we're looking to our next generation of systems and ensuring that we're doing everything to harden our space systems as much as we can. We have some of the best satellite space operations teams in the business, and they're working on advanced tactics, techniques, and procedures and how we make ourselves a harder target. We in the NRO are working on, as I mentioned before, path diversity for our critical communications. We're hardening our infrastructure to include physical infrastructure to our ground stations, and we're also working on hardening our cyber terrain.
Okay, excellent. Well, I remember back in 1998 reading a Chinese white paper, and they had observed how we use space in Bosnia and Kosovo, Desert Storm. And they said, we can't compete there, so we're going to go after their ability to use space. 1998.
That's right.
And command and control. And they meant what they said then, because they've certainly done it. But I think you point out another really important point. In those days, their operations on the terrestrial domain, air, land, and sea, did not depend on space. We did. So they went after that. But at the same time, they built up space capabilities similar to ours, and their terrestrial warfighters on air, land, and sea now depend on their space assets. So this whole notion of being able to gain space superiority, which is something we talk about here a lot at Mitchell, just like we gain superiority in every other domain, is important because we want to be able to take away their ability to use space to enhance their warfighting capability in the terrestrial domains. So it's, as you know, we may be at peace right now, but things are happening, and we call it competition right now, but it's serious, and the potential for not addressing that is huge. And it's just great to hear all the things that the NRO is doing right now to, across the spectrum, address survivability as well as providing the capabilities to our terrestrial warfighters that they need. And in the past, there's often been tension between then the Air Force and the NRO. A lot of it had to do with product delivery and stuff. And now we have a Space Force too. So can you talk a little bit about the teaming relationship now between the Space Force and the NRO? And of course, Secretary of the Air Force now just came out of being the deputy there. I'm sure that helps. But what other things that you have seen in the last 2 years that shows that tension points are being relieved and you're operating more as a team?
Well, I'll tell you, thanks for the question. So I'll tell you right now that the partnership between the National Reconnaissance Office and the Department of the Air Force, and specifically the United States Space Force, has never been stronger. And yes, Secretary Mink may know 1 or 2 things about the National Reconnaissance Office, but in all seriousness, we have someone who's uniquely qualified in this position right now, someone who has served as a rated aviator in the United States Air Force, someone who has led major space acquisition programs for the Air Force, led multiple portfolios of acquisition capabilities for the NRO, worked policy at the highest levels of the Department of War and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and then, as you mentioned, served as our number 2 leader for many years in the NRO. That person understands the capabilities and the uniquenesses of both the Department of the Air Force and the NRO, and the imperative for us to work seamlessly together. And I can just tell you that my boss, Dr. Chris Scalise, is just completely motivated to work with Secretary Mink and with the CSAF and the CSO to further that relationship that is, I believe, already strong. And sir, this, as you mentioned before, this is a long-standing partnership between us and the Department of the Air Force. And let's be honest, the Air Force is a founding member of the National Reconnaissance Office dating back to 1961. Today, we have hundreds of Guardians and airmen that are a core component of our workforce in the NRO. And then we work shoulder to shoulder with the United States Space Force in places like the National Space Defense Center, where we are working together to understand the domain, understand threats as they emerge, and then really leading the operational orchestration of how we as a nation are responding to those threats. We also worked shoulder to shoulder with the Space Force and with NGA at the Joint Mission Management Center that is taking this new proliferated constellation and working through how we fully operationalize that and achieve all of the outcomes that we need for both the intelligence community and as we emphasized before, the military community. There's a couple of programs that we've been working closely with the Space Force, and one of those is something called Silent Barker.
Oh, good. I'm glad you're talking about that.
Yeah, so space domain awareness, we mentioned how important of a mission that is to understand threats as they emerge. Silent Barker started as a joint program between the Space Force and the National Reconnaissance Office, where the NRO is leading the acquisition, the launch integration, and the operations of the space systems themselves, which we have a few of them on orbit right now. And then the Space Force is leading the integration of that data that comes from that system into their broader space domain awareness apparatus, and ensuring that data is properly integrated so that we're making the most out of it and benefiting the entire national space community. One other area, if I could, that we're working closely together is on something called Moving Target Indication, or MTI. And people out who are listening have probably heard the term GMTI, which is Ground Moving Target Indication. But let me just step back and what the heck is that? So Moving Target Indication really is the ability for us from space to detect objects that are defined by a user, to identify what that object is, and then the ability to maintain track of that object to a high precision of accuracy over time. And that time domain is defined by the user as well. So how do you track objects that are smaller and smaller over time in more dense environments? As we get now, so the ability to do, and look, the NRO has been for decades able, and really the reason why we exist is to be able to detect and to identify objects. We've done that through signals and through imagery products since our inception. But this proliferated architecture that we're now embarking on in partnership with the intelligence community, with the Space Force and the command and commands, is now allowing us that persistence to do moving target indication. So that's a really important partnership. And then I think the last one, and you mentioned this in your last question, is the protect and defend mission. And I talked about the things that the NRO is doing within our control to make ourselves harder targets, both in space and ground. But that partnership with the United States Space Force, whose core mission is to how do we gain and achieve and maintain space superiority so that we can ensure free access and operations in the space domain for all nations in the future, is critical. And the NRO relies on that partnership so that the Space Force can help us protect our systems.
Great. I think besides airmen and Guardians, you also have sailors that support your. So I mean, it's across the Department of Defense.
And soldiers, sir.
And soldiers that support the operations there at the
We might even have a Marine.
Well, it only takes one.
It only takes one, yes,
That's
sir. That's what I've been told.
That's great. So back to GMTI, you know, great exercise of it, or use of it, from the JSTARS platform, an air breathing platform, happened in Iraqi Freedom, where we couldn't get any imagery of the battlefield because of dust and cloud cover. But the Joint STARS radar was able to detect a large column of tanks moving south, and we were able to then task B-1 bombers and other assets to go up and destroy the column before it could engage our land forces. So it's not just seeing an individual thing, it's seeing mass movements on the ground that tip and cue the operational commander or allow them to adjust for it. So having that ability to have it globally is going to be powerful, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
So your example brings up the other important facet that makes MTI a success, is that the integration of multiple phenomenologies. And this is not a single phenomenology problem set, is that if we're going to, at the scale that you're talking about, globally be able to, at a user's request, track specific objects and denser, it's going to be, you're going to need 24/7 all-weather access through radar. You're going to need persistent imagery support and signals collection.
Put it all together.
So that's the key, is that how do you integrate these disparate data sets and correlate them to a specific object? And that is something that the NRO, I believe, in partnership obviously with our friends across the intelligence community, is leading the charge on, and to some great effect.
That's great, terrific. Now, integrating all those systems though has got to be a challenge.
It is.
So how's that going? I mean, both from a technical perspective, but also from a personnel perspective at the command and control.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to say that we're just going to throw a little AI on this and solve everything, but I do want to say that AI is going to be a very powerful enabler for us to be more efficient and effective in our systems. And I mentioned that we have employed our first ever artificial intelligence strategy. Really, that kind of looks at which specific workflows and mission sets would be helpful to drive towards more automation, for that example. And we are really committed to, at every echelon of organization and across our mission areas, to drive automation. Because when you're talking now about orders of magnitude more data, orders of magnitude more vehicles, orders of magnitude more processing capabilities, and a customer base that's expanding all around the world, the days of having people in the loop, on the loop, doing manual processes are gone. We have to drive automation to meet the timelines and the integration that you're talking about.
Plus, they only had to do it for a handful of satellites.
That's right.
Now you have to do it for these
Hundreds
big
of
constellations.
Right. Just a couple areas that we're already working to drive automation. And really, like I said before, this is throughout the entire operations cycle. So for satellite command and control, when I came into the NRO, my first assignment back in the early 90s, yes, the gray hair is real. We had scores of people managing the operations of a single satellite. And now we have a single person managing scores of satellites. And we're being able to do that because we automate a lot of the processes. Because all these processes are really just information and data. And data is robust to be, and really a good area of how we can use advanced computations, AI, large language models, machine learning, to really improve and automate the processes. And even some of the anomaly response capabilities in our systems, we have now automated tools that help our operators navigate those. I think the other area that we're driving more automation is in collection orchestration. You mentioned the term tasking. And again, one of my past jobs is in the Overhead Collection Management Center that's a partnership between the NSA and the NRO on how we literally plan the 24/7 schedule for each of our satellites, a very labor-intensive process. And we're driving automation through those. And just two areas where we're doing that is one through working with the community, the IC and our military customers on pre-approved algorithms that allow us to, if you see a condition through your collection, maybe a signal of interest, to autonomously task your constellation to, let's say, for example, drive a picture on that. So that takes a lot of coordination up front, but when it's in place and approved, it allows us to rapidly respond to things as they evolve. And I think the other area that we're working on, and you mentioned target custody through MTI, how do you orchestrate so that you can allow a user to define a priority of a specific object? And we call that object-based orchestration. So a user can say that I am interested in this ship, or this port area, or this vehicle, and that priority now definition can help drive collection. And the system then can make a determination of what phenomenologies could be used to collect, answer the question. And now I'm not saying that is a fully fleshed out capability, but that is something that we are working with the community to drive into.
Certainly powerful. That would be really powerful to be able to do that. And you know, you read in the paper now about AI coming into industry writ large, And a lot of people are saying that there's going to be a lot of people laid off, we won't need them anymore. And others say, no, that's not the case. It seems to me you're on the no, that's not the case side, because you're growing the constellation, so you're not going to need to hire all the analysts that you would have had per satellite when you only had a handful of satellites. In fact, you probably couldn't do that. So AI, it sounds like it can help there and in the data flow, but at the same time, it seems to me you need more sophisticated people working in the NRO to handle some of these complex design, acquisition, systems integrations, and service to your two main customers. It sounds like it's a growth opportunity and one where you're not going to be letting any expertise go because of AI.
Oh, right. And let me respectfully correct you. We
Please.
do have very sophisticated people already in the NRO.
Of course
today.
you do. Yeah,
I think
yeah,
we have some
sure.
of the smartest, most capable technical experts of space reconnaissance in the world.
You
in the
used to
NRO
steal
today.
all our good people from Air Force Space Command. I know you guys always.
Some people would tell you that we still do. We have, but in all seriousness, we
Yeah.
have amazing experts, operations, engineering, acquisition experts across the Space Force and the NRO, and we are and cyber defenders, by the way. So yes, we are continuing to look for what are the right skills for today's mission and what are the right skills that will set us up for success into the future. We are looking hard at programs of how we can attract, hire, and retain data scientists, computer scientists, computer engineers, system engineers, security experts, cyber defense experts. Those really skill sets are really important to us today, and we have some great people who are doing all those systems. But at the scale, even as we draw towards automation of some of our processes and systems, we are always going to need people to do the work that only people can do. And I can tell you right now, I think I'm in a pretty good position to tell you with certainty that we have plenty of work to do.
Good. And is retention an issue? Because certainly there's a lot of commercial satellite companies growing out there, and they have a demand signal too for a workforce, a similar workforce.
Sure.
How's the retention side working for you?
Yeah. Well, let me just say the first is that our workforce is highly blended between industry partners and government members, and our government members come from the Central Intelligence Agency, our own cadre that I mentioned before, celebrating our 10th anniversary, and military, about a third of those. So we already have a blended workforce from those areas to include industry partners who are critical to our success. Yes, you're always going to have competition with growing industry, and especially as the United States' commercial space industry continues to burgeon, and we're all thankful and we all benefit from that. But we find that we have often a revolving door of talent in and out of the NRO, meaning that people who have worked in industry understand the mission and the importance of the NRO's mission, and they want to be a part of it. And sometimes they can be a part of that by contracting or winning contracts through the NRO. Sometimes they want to be part of the team.
Yeah.
And then even people who are part of the NRO who are seeking career broadening opportunities in other parts of the government or maybe in industry, we often find that they end up coming back.
Good. So there's a competition for talent, but there's also a back and forth for talent that's beneficial to you. Right. As well. And so let's talk a little bit more about the commercial.
If I could, that point is so the Secretary of War just came out with an innovative acquisition reform policy just weeks ago, and one of the many tenets of that is to have a workforce that understands government requirements and the capabilities today into the future of commercial industry, and really incentivizing that balance of throughout a career. How can you have a blended career, time in government and time in industry?
And so we've seen how commercial assets have been integrated into parts of the conflict, the war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So as the commercial space industry grows and the deployment of their constellations grows, there's going to be a demand signal, I would think, on the supply chains. There'll be security issues on what's acceptable technology for a commercial satellite, what's not. It's not hardened enough, it's not capable enough for perhaps a government mission set. Can you talk a little bit about any challenges in that area that you or currently experience it or foresee.
Yeah. Well, let me first say that we in the NRO and our mission partners view commercial ISR providers as a force multiplier.
For sure. Yeah.
You know, our hybrid architecture allows us to integrate commercially procured products, you know, electro-optical, radar, and other phenomenologies into our infrastructure that allows our national technical means, our intricate, the exquisite systems that you talked about earlier, to focus on things that they're uniquely capable to do.
Yeah.
And then allow some of the more day-to-day tasks to be done by commercially procured systems. And especially when shareability is a driving factor, how better to share information with allies and partners than things that are procured on the commercial marketplace. Obviously, you have to go through their right approval authorities to do that, but it does allow that opportunity. So that integration of commercial and national systems is critical, and I think, and we see exceeding value in that. The other area in commercial that we're doing is that through our strategic commercial enhancements contracts, and really what we're doing in the NRO is continuing to look for new providers, i.e. new companies, new technologies, and even before companies may get systems into operations on orbit, we have ways of entering into contract agreements to test out whether those capabilities will have relevance to our numerous customers around. So this is something that we're continuing, and in fact, the next round of our strategic commercial enhancements contracts will be through a commercial solutions opening, or CSO, which is a new contract mechanism that has a revolving 5-year window and allows industry partners to put in bids for a proposal on these phenomenologies. And actually, we've set this up to be not just one phenomenology, but multiple: EO, radar, RF, hyperspectral, and LiDAR. So companies now, right now, have the ability to, if they have products that could be relevant, to put proposals in those, and we'll continue to consider them as they come in.
Unsolicited proposals, just offering their expertise.
So that contract mechanism allows us this open 5-year revolving window. You mentioned some challenges, and supply chain is always going to be something that we're paying critical attention to. For things, critical components like crypto gear, to ensure the secure, the encryption of our critical signals and information that we're passing from satellite to ground and back and forth. We're working very closely with the Space Force, with the NSA, and with industry on how we ensure that we have multiple providers for these critical components. And that's just one example, and there's several others. And then you mentioned the security. As we grow the number of industry partners that we have, the ability to protect information as we go from R&D to acquisition to fielding systems is super critical. Yeah. And we need to ensure that the industry partners that we're partnering with have that same importance and dedication to security. So just two things that we're doing in that regard is, one, is that we're baking in from the earliest stages of design and our request for proposals for industry solicitation requirements for security practices.
Protection. Good.
And as we now move into relationships with these industry providers, we are holding them accountable to living up to those standards. And we do that through assessments of past performance, meaning how does a contractor compete and win for new work in the future, and also through things like award fee and holding them to accountable, and really jeopardizing real financial gains if they don't adhere to those security principles. And then the last thing I'd say is that we're working with some of these new entrants, smaller companies that may not have the resources immediately to create their own secure facilities or SCIFs. How do we work with them to procure commercially available capabilities, SCIF capabilities, to allow their cleared personnel to work on some projects, even if they don't have too many.
Which often prevents them from even bidding.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so that's great. Yeah. How about industrial-based capacity? I mean, I would think that because of the large commercial constellations being put up, that there's a growing industrial base to provide things you need to build a satellite. For example, any issues there, or?
Well, I wouldn't even say issues. There may
benefits.
be issues. I think there's opportunities there. And I'm glad you asked the question, because commercial to the NRO doesn't mean just procuring pixels. We have great providers who are doing that today. But we are injecting commercial practices across all of our mission sets. Just a couple of examples. One is, hey, we wouldn't have this proliferated constellation of satellites if it wasn't for industry putting in the investment to create manufacturing processes and production rates that allowed us to scale to these hundreds of constellations. Second is that industry is often leading in things like AI development, AI applications, cloud computing. We have right now a mixture of on-premises computing and working with industry on commercially available cloud computing resources. And the benefit of that is that as industry is continuing to evolve their security, because industry is
they're threatened
as well.
Yeah.
We can take advantage of the latest and greatest technologies of how you secure that information. And then launch is another great example of how we're leveraging commercial expansion of services to ensure our continued access to space at reasonable cost points.
Yeah, it's really come down, hasn't it?
Yes, sir.
Over the years. And before we go to the audience for questions, let me wrap up with a question about allies and sharing.
Sure.
It hasn't just been an issue in space. In every domain, there's certain levels of classifications. We can't share things. Maybe heightened more in space, given our previous architecture and, as we talked about, the exquisite capabilities we had. But how is that relationship evolving with regard to sharing information with our allies, partnering with them? Frankly, they have capabilities of their own too, and I would think we'd want to be in a relationship where, as a team, they're sharing what they have with us, and we're doing the same with them, both to deter, but also to win in case of a conflict.
Sure. Well, we're stronger when we're together,
Yes,
for sure.
For sure.
The NRO has a long history of partnering very closely with what we call our Five Eyes community, which is the nations of Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and the United Kingdom. We have collaborated, specifically with Australia and Great Britain on a lot of our missions for years and years and years. Just a couple of examples of some latest missions. So we launched 2 NRO missions back in 2022 out of New Zealand. We worked with New Zealand and the Naval Postgrad School on a demonstration vehicle that we call Otter, which is a CubeSat that is testing a couple of our advanced R&D capabilities to include space communication systems. We worked with the UK on their first ever launch from the UK. And we're also, so beyond our Five Eyes partners, we, the NRO, work with Space Force on the Schriever wargame. We're a participant in that's run by Space Force. And that now really exposes the NRO to our non-traditional partners. 10 nations have traditionally been involved with that. And really, Schriever wargame is a global scenario, a crisis erupts, and we're looking at, for each of these nations, a whole of government approach of how each of these nations would react to it. How do we determine where, how and when, and where we partner on specific areas with a space focus, obviously. And although the NRO is not a leading player in this, we do gain a lot out of this exposure.
Yeah, I would think there's, and I'm familiar with some of the other nations that actually have on-orbit ISR capabilities.
Right.
And back in the early parts of this century, 2006, 7, 8, we actually, Air Force Space Command, went out and talked to them and tried to understand how we could complement each other in our work. But there was a lot of classification issues that got in the way of that. So I would think that these other nations beyond the Five Eyes that have fielded space assets, surveillance and reconnaissance assets for their own national security, if teaming with them would also enhance our national security and vice versa, given our capabilities. So it actually, is it going beyond the Five Eyes, this cooperation?
Well, I can only speak for the NRO, and now our focus is on our traditional relationships. But we obviously, from a national security space standpoint, there's
other opportunities. Yeah.
So you mentioned partnerships, and allies is one critical partnership for us. If I could, maybe just offer a couple others that we're pursuing. One is with academia. Some of our most brilliant minds are in the academic institutions right now, and we want to make sure that we have opportunities to partner with them on research and development activities that are important to the National Reconnaissance Office and important to the nation. So I think right around the last time we spoke, we had just designated the NRO as a federal lab. We call it the National Reconnaissance, Space Reconnaissance Laboratory. And what that does for us is allows us now avenues and opportunities to work with other government agencies and academia and industry on deliberate research and development activities where we can share information share results, and share how we're integrating these these advanced technologies into operational systems in the future. It also allows us now to enter into what we call cooperative research and development agreements with academia, and we're working on a couple of those right now.
Is that being done kind of outside the security fence so that you're not inhibited by the great people we have in academia who maybe don't have a clearance, but they're working away on new technologies?
It's actually both.
Both,
I mean,
inside and outside.
You'd be surprised. There are some members of the universities that do have clearances, working with other other government agencies. But you're right, is that we're working on ways of how you can leverage this research and advanced technologies that might be relevant to us. Think of autonomy. Think of radiation-hardened microelectronics.
Sure.
Those things we can work in outside the fence, like you said, environments. And then I think the last partnership that's super important to us, you mentioned the Space Force specifically, our partnership with the military services. My boss and our leadership team have biannual sync meetings with the leadership from the U.S. Navy and the Army, to ensure that they're aware of the capabilities that we have and that we are aware of their emerging requirements for how our services can provide their support to their mission. We work very closely with the Air Force, and specifically on their command and control and communications and battle management PEO, Major General Luke Cropsey. We're ensuring that NRO capabilities, that they're informed of them, and two, that we're working hard to integrate the capabilities that are relevant to their really important mission set. And then we didn't mention U.S. Space Command, and I couldn't not mention them. Obviously, they have the responsibility of really controlling the operations, the tempo, and the capabilities and the objectives in the space domain. And we have a really, really important partnership with U.S. Space Command. Dr. Scalise and General Whiting have quarterly meetings that they call the Joint Space Warfighting Forum. We have one coming up in the next couple of weeks, where really we can tee up specific topics of joint interest to ensure that as we develop capabilities, as they develop concepts of operations, procedures, or processes, that we're working together. We mentioned the National Space Defense Center. Obviously, we work very closely with Space Command there. And then I just want to say that we're very much integrated in the planning activities for Space Command and other commands to ensure that as they're developing their operational plans, their contingency plans, that they're informed by the capabilities and in some cases maybe the limitations of NRO systems. And then lastly, we exercise very closely with Space Command and other commands. And in fact, just this year we did something called Odin Force, which was aligned with the Tier 1 exercise for Space Command and INDOPACOM, and we're in the planning process right now for 2026. So we really want to make sure that our processes or CONOPS are linked to our critical customers.
So it sounds like you're breaking down or have broken down a lot of the classification barriers that limited those discussions in the past. And that's terrific that you're integrating into the war plan. So they know what you can and can't do, so we don't make bad assumptions in our plans. So that's terrific. You know, I could keep going on and on with you, General Povak, but we need to turn over a little time to our audience.
Yes, sir.
And Josh Baker, one of our great analysts here at Mitchell Institute, will be quarterbacking this for us. And I just would remind our audience that if you have a question, you come up voice, please, or text, please let us know your name and your organization, and we'll be happy to use the rest of the time to give General Povak a chance to address your question. So over to you, Josh.
Thank you, sir. Our first question is from Courtney Albin of the Air and Space Forces magazine. Courtney, please unmute your mic.
Hi, yes, thanks for taking the time today. I wanted to ask about the proliferated constellation. I wondered if you could clarify how many of the 200 or so satellites that NRO has launched over the last 2 years are part of that constellation. I know you noted there's other kind of exquisite satellites that you've been launching as well. And then I wondered too, looking toward the future, how many satellites does NRO expect it will need to kind of provide that persistence and precision that you're wanting from this constellation ultimately?
Well, Courtney, thanks very much for that question. I think, obviously the specific numbers and capabilities of any of our individual systems or constellations is not something that I really can talk about here. I can say, though, that of the 200 systems, that a large preponderance of those were part of those proliferated constellations. And I can say that every year that we're launching multiple launches of those, and every single one of those launches have multiple of these satellite systems. And we're talking on the order of not ones and twos, but hundreds. But I do appreciate your question. Thank you.
So it's not a single type you're putting up here. There's so much required to make this new architecture work.
I would view these as a constellation of systems, sensors and communication systems, yes.
Right, and various types of sensors, so yeah, great. Who's next, Josh?
Our next question is from Frank Wolf, Defense Daily. Frank, please unmute your mic.
Yeah, hi. Just wanted to ask about the space-based radar, GMTI, and what's going on with it. Last May, General Gagnon had talked about basically, again, it would be proliferated LEO, just to give you some benefits, it's a benefit being in space rather than J-stars and sort of curvature of the Earth problems. But have you selected a contractor yet? What's the timetable? How many satellites do you envision up there? Just basically what's going on with it. Thank you.
Well, hey, thanks for the question, Frank. So I would view GMTI, or ground moving target indication, as a evolution of the proliferated systems that we have that we're working on today. These basically are more exquisite, more capable sensors that allow us to see smaller objects in more dense, cluttered areas. As far as numbers and contracts, that's just not something that the NRO typically discusses. So I think we'll leave it there. Just the fact that we're making great progress on the development of our entire proliferated system to include the next generation.
Yeah, but you mentioned earlier custody is important when it comes to GMTI. So you take a picture and you see something moving here, and if you don't look again for, you go blank and you don't look again for an hour. You want to make sure you're looking at the same formation. So
sure.
It will drive the numbers. The numbers are classified, but the size of the constellation will be really based on the requirement of the warfighter, right?
Well, absolutely, and that's true for any system that we in the NRO or any acquisition organization is based on what are the requirements and what's the performance of the technology that's available today.
Yeah, great.
So one of the benefits of these proliferated systems is that they may not be as exquisite or intricate as some of our more enhanced, exquisite and expensive systems. Their design life is not typically as long because we have and that allows us the ability to continuously inject new technologies to improve their performance as technology advances.
Yeah, another advantage. Okay, we have time for just one more question. So Josh?
Our next question is from Vivian Machi, Aviation Week. Vivian, please unmute your mic.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking this call. General, I was wondering if the NRO has any interest or if there are plans to launch any additional silent Barker satellites, or do you see that, sort of constellation of capabilities as being complete at this point? Thank you.
Well, thanks for the question, Vivian. Silent Barker is multiple vehicles, and obviously it provides a very important and critical mission for the NRO and for the nation, and we're committed to working with Space Force and ensuring that capability that exists today is relevant into the future. As far as the requirements for future capabilities, I'd probably defer you to Space Force on that. But I will just say that we have success with the systems that are in operations today. They're providing great benefit to the national security space enterprise and to the nation.
Thanks. It occurred to me, General Povak, that should Mitchell Institute have existed 40 years ago when I was a young officer and sent an invitation to the NRO to have someone come over to have this type of conversation, the answer would be no. I mean, the information that you've shared with us today, all unclassified, about this revolution in space-based intelligence and surveillance, is just, it's so refreshing to hear and encouraging to all. And it's important that people know what you're doing and what you can tell us about. It's important that our adversaries know that as well to deter them, and that our great folks on Capitol Hill who make the budgets that support your organization understand the importance of it. So thanks, I can't thank you enough for coming over and spending time and being as transparent as you possibly can be, given classification constraints, and I think really appreciate it. So.
Well, thanks, sir. And thanks again to the Mitchell Institute. Thanks for everyone listening today. Thanks so much for the questions. And really, if I could,
Sure.
just thanks to our incredible workforce. We're
Absolutely.
really proud of what we do. I think our workforce understands the importance of our mission, especially this time in history. The partnerships that we have, the capabilities that we're deploying are super critical. And it's just an honor to be here with you and to talk about the critical people and the mission that we have. In
Thanks
NRO.
very much. Thanks. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of this Schriever Spacepower series. Thank you again, General Povak, for taking the time to speak with us today. And from all of us at Mitchell Space, have a great Spacepower kind of day.